Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your national award-winning podcast radio program, Let's Talk America, with host Shana Thornton. I'm Shana, of course, your on-air host and your producer of the programming. And tonight, I am so excited to have you on, speaking with two amazing gentlemen that's going to share something very important. You know, we cover a lot of shows here and a lot of topics on Let's Talk America, ones that matter, a lot of stories about health, about history, education, social issues, so much to really tackle in the world for all of us to be educated, motivated, and inspired. And tonight's show is no exception. It's a live video episode. It is live stream. If you're watching us right now on Sunday evening, that means that we can see all of your comments and your questions. And we are going to cover the historical pioneering trailblazers, the first African-American Marines in the United States of America, Montford Point Marines. And I'm so excited about this story and this important journey for us. And it was just a coincidence of meeting people with my family being involved. I will say this because I rarely ever get the opportunity to say this. Tonight's show is special and it's a personal mission of mine. His name is Lisco Thomas Sr. and he was my paternal grandfather. His oldest child with my grandmother was my beloved father, and he was a proud member of Montford Point Marines. So tonight's show is personal and it has the legacy of my grandfather. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a show. All the shows mean something special to me, but tonight's show means extra special because it's in honor of my granddad who passed away when I was 5 years old. So this is for you, Granddaddy in heaven. So let's get right to the programming, talking about the first African-American Marines in the United States of America. I'm no expert on it, even though my grandfather was one, but again, he passed when I was 5, and I have two experts on with us today. So excited to have the one and only Ambassador Theodore Britton Jr. on with us. I believe right now he's out of Florida. And ladies and gentlemen, he's an actual living legacy, a living member of the Montford Point Marines. This gentleman, he does not look it, but he's 90 plus. And am I right, Johnny? He's 99 years old? 99. You're officially the oldest guest I've ever had on the program, sir. So excited to have you on. Sir?
And still at room temperature.
That's right. I love it. I'm sure you're going to be one of our favorites as well. And we also have with us on the one and only Mr. Johnny Higdon. And he is, of course, with the Montford Point Marines Association, a very important organization that have dedicated their time and efforts to advocating the history and the legacy of those Montford Point Marines. And both gentlemen have served their nation. Thank you for your service, gentlemen, as we celebrate Memorial Day coming up tomorrow. Of course, an important time to honor and recognize the fallen soldiers of our nation. So it's a fitting conversation. And I know, Johnny, your organization, you all have some great plans for some activities, and we're going to touch on that. But first, we have a tradition here at Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton Podcast Radio, where we ask our exclusive guests, and tonight we have two, usually we have one, but such a special topic, we wanted to have two of them on, where we ask them, what is your personal mission with this? And I will actually start off with you, Ambassador. Obviously, you're a living member of the Marines, Montford Point Marines, and that's special within itself. But why is it important for you to be at the young age of 99 years old and still be dedicated to make sure the story of the Montford Point Marines gets out?
Why is it? I would say that I have a story to tell, and as long as I can tell it, I should share it.
Yeah, I love that. As long as you can tell it, share. I love that. Great
Yes.
answer.
And by the way, this gentleman is Sergeant Major Johnny Higdon, the highest rank you can get in the enlisted side. Yes.
Wow. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
7 stripes on his sleeve.
Wow. That's pretty impressive. So I hope I'm saying that right. Mr. Higdon, Sergeant Major, is that right?
Sergeant Major.
Thank you, Sergeant Major Higdon. Tell us why it's important for you. Obviously, you served your nation, but right now you're in retirement. Why is it important for you to continue with this mission?
It's extremely important because of Marines like Ambassador Britton. Their success paved the way for people like me to serve. And as you mentioned, it's so fitting with Memorial Day. Out of the 20,000 of these heroes that served at Montford Point Camp, there's so many that have not been recognized and received the gratitude of a grateful nation. So it's important for us to tell this story as far and wide as possible, so that all of these heroes can truly be recognized and receive the gratitude of a grateful nation. So that is what we do this for.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that information, because you both, it's collaborative efforts, really. You have Living Legacy, Sergeant Major Higdon, as ambassador on with us, but you yourself being a younger gentleman, making sure that that story is told so that history is not forgotten. And I will say this as someone who journalism is near and dear to her heart, and also just a community member, that from history, we can learn so many lessons. And speaking of that lesson, Ambassador Britton, I have to ask you this. You've seen so much, 99 years of living. You served as one of the first African-American Marines in this country. What life lesson, in your personal opinion, came from that experience of being with those first group of African-American Marines?
The Marine Corps taught us to be an entirely different group of men. For example, the first group of men taken in the Marine Corps was specifically 200 from the East, 200 from the central U.S., and 500 from the South. And there was an assumption that men from the South would be more easygoing, humble, and everything like that. What they didn't realize that by training us to be Marines, we were going to be an entirely different kind of person. For example, men who formerly might have spoken very mumbling suddenly had to speak up. Men who would lower their eyes and what have you suddenly directed to look a person directly in the eye. And instead of bent over, we had to stand erect, shoulders back, chin in, chest out, and so forth. And when we walked, we didn't ramble down the street. We took strides. So this was an entirely different kind of person who went back to the South. And yet the majority of our men at that time were coming from the South.
Wow. That's a powerful point.
Yeah.
I was not aware of. My grandfather, I told you, was one. He was from South Carolina, Aiken County, South Carolina.
Yes. And by the way, we did not know our complete history as much as it is being revealed these days and the little days before that. For example, in Iwo Jima, there were 5,000 Black Marines there, both fighting as well as performing services. And because the first men on the battle lines were white and had to continue to remain there, when we came up, it was a relief to them and a godsend to them, because we were able to relieve them, give them a chance to breathe, to eat, to put on clothes and so forth, because many of them lost everything that they had going in, so forth. So
Wow.
it became a service. We were called Black Angels at one point because the men were doing such great services for those on the front line.
Wow. Such bravery and such courage. And I think what you said, you have so many people that experience things in the moment. They say, and we appreciate, they often say the respect and the reverence that come with it, but they were just doing their job. They were just serving their country. They were just saving lives. What was an instinct to them. And you're saying not being really aware of the historical moment, but being in it.
Yes. Well, so many of them made great accomplishments. For example, I was talking with a gentleman in Mississippi who's still alive, who came out of the Marine Corps, finished his college education, went on to the University of Chicago, and served for 30 years as president of Jackson State University.
Wow.
But this is just one of many. One, the gentleman who became an assistant secretary of the Navy.
Wow. Prominent
attorneys, just many of them I could just call off, but I'll stop.
No, I love that. That's an important part of it, because and Mr. Higdon, Sergeant Major Higdon, I have to ask you this. How many do we know that were a part of Montford Point Marines? Help us out with that history lineage. Were all of them that were considered Montford Point Marines some of the first, or how late did Montford Point Marines did that title go into?
So the unique history with it is From 1942 to 1949, that is the period for the title of Montford Point Marine. Okay. And what's key about that is that they have that unique distinction because of where they trained. See, Marines train in one or two places, either Parris Island, South Carolina, or San Diego, California.
Okay.
But because of segregation in the 40s, when these blacks came into the Marine Corps, when they were allowed to serve in the Marine Corps, they put them in a different place called Montford Point Camp. So from 1942 is when the camp opened, and because of their success, the camp closed as a training facility in 1949. So after that, after their success, now all Marines trained at the Parris Island or San Diego facility because they integrated. But those few, or those 20,000 that served from 42 to 49, have the unique distinction of being called a Montford Point Marine.
Beautiful. I love that. And so I love history, right? I've had the opportunity to study somewhat about wars, and of course, World War II, way before my time, but my grandfather served during that time period with Montford Point Marines. So all of those guys obviously were individuals that were of the great generation, and their children, offspring, would be considered baby boomers, right?
That is correct.
Wow. Yes. So this is where we look at history in some famous movies where they're coming back from war and there's a boom in the population. So correct. The ones who were fathers to those children would have been included, if we need to put them in a category, would have been the Montford Point Marines.
That's correct.
How many, you said 1942 through 1949, how many do we have on count that you're aware of?
So the official record, there was approximately 20,000 that served.
19,268.
The exact number. And approximately to date, we found just over 4,000 of these heroes. So we have quite a few to go, but this is why it's so important that we get our story out there, because we know that many of them are long since gone, but the families are there. And we want to make sure that the families know just how important the work that these heroes done. So, and they know they're part of this history now. So we tell their story in hoping that we run across someone who will start asking that question. You know, my father or my grandfather or my uncle or someone that I know served in World War II or in the 40s as a Marine. And then that, of course, allows us to work with the family to help verify their records. And then, of course, we can present the family with the Congressional Gold Medal, which is, of course, the nation's highest civilian award.
I love that. I love that. My grandfather was recognized in some efforts you all did a few years ago. Again, if you're watching us, welcome to your award-winning Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton. I'm Shana, your on-air host and your executive producer. I have the honor of having two amazing individuals on with us that are historical storytellers in their own right. We are talking about the historical trailblazing pioneering men of the 1940s that are named or titled, if you will, Montford Point Marines. 1942 through 1949, as Sergeant Major just pointed out to us, this conversation is already motivating and it's inspiring. If you didn't hear me echo this is a personal mission of mine, as my own paternal grandfather was one of those individuals, one of those men who were considered or certainly been recognized as a Montford Point Marine. So my grandfather has transitioned. He transitioned many years ago when I was just at the tender age of 5 years old. But his legacy continues. And for me to do this program tonight, and you know, if you follow us, we do a lot of topics, but this is one that's near and dear to my heart and in honor of my grandfather. I also have to say this, a shout out to my father, his namesake, who also served proudly in the Navy during the Vietnam era. Thank you to my own father and his service. And also to my aunt, to all of my family members, but to my Aunt Martha, who has been dedicated to making sure that my family and our family unit truly aware of the Montford Point Marines. So thank you. I'm going to get to our comments that we have. If you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook, get your questions in. You have a 99-year-old, I don't want to say old ambassador, but young gentleman that's with us, and he's able to answer your questions directly about being a pioneer, being one of the first African-American Marines in all of the United States. Get your questions in. And so I'll first say this, we have from Glenn out of Atlanta. He said, Ambassador, and also to you, Sergeant Major, thank you for your service. Thank you, Glenn. Kim says the Montford Point Marines are an important part of our history. Thank you so much, Kim, for following us and adding that comment, because it's very true. Get your comments and questions in. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, we want to hear from you tonight, all right? If you're watching us from anywhere in the world, out of Canada, wherever you are, let us know. Jamal James, who is a Marine currently serving himself out of North Carolina, said, good evening, gentlemen. So your fellow Marine right there. So thank you so much. You know, I've got to ask you this, Ambassador. When we look back on things, and I say this as a Generation Xer, my father being a baby boomer, my grandfather and grandmother being a part of the great generation, things can get, I don't want to say forgotten, but the further we get away from something, right, the further we often, unfortunately, lose the impact and the influence of that era in time. What would you want our sons and daughters right now of my generation, and they could have a kid ranging from an 8 years old to 25 years old? What do you want them to know about the Montford Point Marines?
That they were a special breed. They were considered on trial. Now, as World War II began, there were only 5 Army officers on duty. That's the only branch that had officers. 2 of them were the Davises, Benjamin O. Davis Sr. and Jr., and three chaplains. Okay, we started off, everyone had to be a private. We had some who had been Army officers who had come into the Marine Corps as privates. We had one man, we call him Hashmark Johnson. The camp is named after him now. And he had served 17 years in the Army and in the Navy and so forth. Now, one other thing that the Sergeant Major did pass over a little bit is that, you remember he said we've given out 4,000 medals?
Yes, sir.
We're still looking for the families of the other 6,000. Each of those medals cost $200 and more. And if you figure 6,000, you're talking about $1,200,000. I wonder where they're going to get all of this money from. But thus far, we've been able to give out medals as we've come upon families, and we don't hesitate to give anyone that medal whose family
Beautiful.
includes a member of the Montford Point who was trained as a recruit at Montford Point. This year, for the first time, we're going to award the medal to the commanding officer who was white. His name was Colonel Samuel A. Woods Jr. And he treated every one of those recruits as men.
Oh,
And
wow.
he stood behind them. When others attempted to demean us, this man stood behind us. And so he was really revered by all of the men who came to Montford Point. We're honoring him, his family, this time. Him through his family, we're giving him.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point to point out, Ambassador. And if you are just joining us, we have the one and only Ambassador Theodore R. Britton Jr. on with us. He's living legacy. He's 99 years young, and he was one of the legendary Montford Point Marines. Living legacy. So honored to have him with us tonight on your award-winning Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton radio. And one of the things I did want to point out, Ambassador, is, and we know this from the civil rights movement, right? Obviously, African Americans were at the center of it, but we all know that it did take other individuals of other races as well. Obviously, not all of them, but some were dedicated to the cause to help measures being passed in the government and on. Because I think of, for instance, Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who they said was a big advocate of African Americans being able to enter the military. And so that's a key point, because you have to remember in that time period who was in the government, who was running the government. And so for certain opportunities to come, certainly it took a diverse group of people. Would you agree?
Yes. Some people have never heard of what was called the Kitchen Cabinet under Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's composed of about 10 Black folks who were very influential in advising him, and especially Mrs. Roosevelt. One, of course, is Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune.
Yes.
It happened that her adopted son, Sergeant Major Huger, served as a direct assistant to Colonel Woods and knew a great deal, and he probably offered him a great deal of advice, because before coming in the Marine Corps, he had served sometimes as a chauffeur for Mrs. Roosevelt and other times helping her whenever she visited Mrs. Bethune, which was often. He also
Yes.
became one of our first black sergeant majors in the Marine Corps.
Wow. What history? And thank you for pointing that out, because as anyone that knows civil rights history, when you hear the name of Mary McLeod Bethune, right, you're starting to hear these. This is the same individual, along with others, and some that we don't know, not as well known, but they keep being in positions to help others, and that's exactly what they did. And so thankful for their service. I've got to ask you this, Sergeant Major Higdon. He mentioned, and you mentioned that there were about almost 20,000, but Ambassador got us exactly on that 19,000 number that I don't even recall, but I know he does at 99 years old. But obviously there are thousands more where you haven't been contacted, they haven't been recognized after the death, because obviously majority of these men have passed on and transitioned, like my paternal grandfather. My question to you, and I know it may be an obvious one to you, but I have to ask this because I'll be honest with you, if until my aunt brought it up and my father through the conversation, I did not grow up necessarily knowing day to day that my grandfather was a trailblazer who went to North Carolina from a small, meager town in South Carolina to make history. And so my question to you is, one, explain why a family member may not know that their father or grandfather was a Montford Point Marine. Was there a stigma behind it? Were there perhaps memories with the military? And I don't know the answer to this, why they wouldn't openly share. I mean, because we do know now, obviously serving the military is a brave, courageous act that sometimes comes with layers of complexity.
So you got to remember, in the 40s, when a lot of these heroes came home from the war, it was still not a popular time for a black veteran. It was still segregation was still going on when they came home from the war. So the same atrocities they fought against overseas, they came back home to those same type of prejudice and injustice. So a lot of them had to take their service with them to their grave. A lot of them didn't share their story because, again, it wasn't a popular time. And we never had the privilege of having a movie or something to that effect to kind of get it out to the mainstream. So it's kind of on us as the association, to take this story to the masses so that we can try to find these families, because the big piece we want people to understand is, just like you share so eloquently, is when you learn that your loved one was a part of this history, it's such a game changer. And this is what we want. This is what we want all of these heroes to feel. Their families should know how important the work that they did to change the nation. Because, again, I'm living proof. Had it not been for the service of men like Ambassador Britton, I would not have had the honor of serving as a Marine.
Such an honor to have him with us still. And thank you for pointing that out. You are watching live your award-winning Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton radio podcast. I'm Shana, have the pleasure of being on with Ambassador and Sergeant Major, talking about the historical pioneering first African-American men in all of the United States. Sergeant Major, I've got to ask this, and you bring up a point I wasn't really aware of, and I thought I knew a lot about military history. I knew during the Nam conflict, if you will, that it was there were some mixed emotions, as you know, emerging out of the early 70s as we were exiting Vietnam, where there are countless stories of our Marines and our Navy members, and you all being a Marine, and others being sped on coming through the airport, right? We've seen these scenes in popular movies, but I was not aware and didn't think of it, obviously, because it's so far removed, in terms of World War II, because we see that they were all American heroes, but you brought up a point of segregation. Perhaps that was looked upon somewhat different in the African-American community.
So to take it even further, there was a fear that when these veterans came home, there was a fear that they were going to use their newfound prowess. As Ambassador mentioned, that they stood taller, they looked you in the eyes. There was a fear that they were going to use this to start demanding more rights, per se. Wow. So violence did uptick a little bit when they came home. Okay. And that's what led to the passing of the new executive order in 1981, which ended segregation. Because the front page of papers was littered with incidents of veterans being involved in brawls or with posses going after these veterans because they wanted to kind of keep them in their place.
Wow.
So that led to the new administration passing that executive order, the Truman administration, which led to eventually the end of segregation in the military, which is why we say the Montford Point Marines, their success, because they proved that they were just as worthy of the title Marine as their white counterparts. So that success led to the end of segregation, which again led to people like me being allowed to serve.
So impressive. When I was a young child, as a teenager, I was a part of a very important enrichment program. And I had the opportunity to a gentleman who served as a federal judge who was a World War II vet. And he was in the Army, if you will, and he's since passed. But he shared an important story with me and the group. And I remember it to this day, where he said he had served his nation, right? He was in the Army. He comes home and he's walking down the street in Columbia, South Carolina. And he was seeing German POWs going through the front door to eat. And he still had to go around to the colored section, if you will. And I think it's just a reminder, World War II vets are still alive. Obviously, they're the parents of the baby boomers. When you think of the reality of that, right? Not being so far removed, even though we like to think it is, but that is history that needs to be understood, so we can understand really the motivations of some veterans from the Montford Point Marines and others, perhaps why the information was never shared as we sat around eating dinner, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Such a great point. I want to get to our questions. Thank you so much for everybody supporting us tonight. We have Martha out of Columbia, South Carolina. She says, gentlemen, thank you for your service. What can I do to keep the Montford Point Marines alive and going? I'll turn that over to you, Ambassador, and then Sergeant Major, I want you to answer that as well.
Well, of course, just by knowing the history of it, you know that we were excluded, black men were excluded from the Marine Corps for 147 years. We fought in the Revolution, but after the Union was established, we were excluded. So it took until 1942 to be admitted into it again. And even then, it was looked upon as being a temporary phenomenon. Now, during World War II, we felt ourselves as being fighting on two fronts: the front out in the Pacific and the front here on home soil. Now, the difference, of course, is in the Pacific, we had rifles and bullets, and we know how to fire those rifles. So the ones out there were less of a problem, because when they appeared on the other side of the line, we had means of eliminating that threat to us. But on the home front, it was a little bit more difficult, and it took a longer time. Again, those men on the fighting front out in the Pacific, fellow Marines, knew us better than the ones on the home front back here, because we helped them in so many different ends. When they were dying on the field, we carried them to hospitals and whatever, or to give them medical treatment, not to mention food, clothing, and a lot of other things. It's only in recent years I realized how valuable the services were, and I'll be talking about it tomorrow as I do a speech for the Memorial Day services down here in Florida. I'm originally out of New York and so forth, but I get around. I've covered a lot of territory. One other thing is, when I became ambassador, I realized that my title outranked generals, and so whenever I go to any of the Marine Corps installations, I call the protocol office to let them know that I'm going to be on the base, because the commanding generals and so forth recognize that difference and go out of their way to be respectful here. But you have so many questions out there that it means that you have to get some of the books. For example, there's a new book out called Shoulders to Stand On, the experiences of about 18 different Marines, including 2 of them who are legends in the Marine Corps: Sergeant Major Johnson. The new camp, the former Montford Point camp is named after him now.
Okay.
Another one is a man named Sergeant Major Huff. He became the longest serving Sergeant Major in the Marine Corps. During 1945, we had our very first Marine officer, black, but he was simultaneously discharged as he got his commission, because the regulations was that no black person could outrank a white person in the Marine
Oh,
Corps.
wow.
And last but not least, the first regular Marine officer to come into the Marine Corps was in 1948 with John Earl Rudder. Those are our pioneers on that side. Today, of the three four-star generals on active duty, two are white and one is black. So we've come a long way from being at the very bottom to being at the very top, yes.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're dropping in, if you happen to be watching this on replay, you're here live from Living Legacy. He is 99. You heard me, 99. And he's
I'm close
sharper than.
to 100. I'm closer to 100. 99 was something like 6 or 7 months ago, and
When is your birthday?
October 17th.
So this young man will be 100 years a centurion sooner than we think. And what an honor. He is 99 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the one and only Ambassador Theodore R. Britton Jr. He is out of Florida right now, but originally from New York and one of the living pioneers. And so thankful to have you. Not many left, as we know, of any of the great generation of World War II, one of the first Montford Point Marines, first African-American Marines. We are spotlighting trailblazers in the military. We're talking about Montford Point Marines. If you heard me earlier, it's a personal show. This one is. So many shows that we cover, but this one is in honor of my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who has gone on, and he was a member of Montford Point Marines. So excited to speak with you all about this. And Sergeant Major, I promised you that I was going to turn it over to you. Martha, out of South Carolina, said, what can she do to keep the legacy alive?
Well, just as the ambassador stated, tell the story. Don't underestimate the fact that people just don't know their story. So all of our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, share our pages, share our content, so that people can start asking these questions. The world, when people hear about the Montford Point Marines, they want to know who they are. And when they learn about that history, they start asking questions. And that leads us to finding other families of Montford Pointers so that we can recognize them with the Congressional Gold Medal. And of course, also, we have to make a point that the organization is a nonprofit organization ran by all volunteers. It's a 501c3 organization. So support is always needed. Support in the form of donations, volunteers. All this is always needed in order for us to continue to do what we do, so that we can find ways to continue to get this story out there to the masses.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a key thing to remember. I mean, obviously, I'm sure you all need other support, participation, financial donations, but you bring a good point. Tell the story. That's something free, right? I think so many times people say, well, they're asking me to do this, they're asking me to do that, but it's just simply sharing, right? And I'll tell you this, Sergeant Major and Ambassador, I've had individuals on this show, cardiologists, oncologists, endocrinologists, therapists, psychiatrists. They've come on and they've said, if people just are transparent and share, we can save so many lives on every angle. And here you are, Sergeant Major, also echoing that, of saying, just share the story of your dad, your granddad, your uncle. And it may seem something you're saying, well, nobody wants to hear that, but you would be surprised. And if people may show an interest now or not, teenagers may not necessarily, but you and I, all three of us know this, 199 and the other two not close to that yet, but pray to be. We know that there's so much information that was told us that we may not have been interested in at the time. But when we get older and wiser, we're saying that's pretty neat to know. So thank you for echoing that. And thank you for your question, Ms. Martha. Also, Diane says, sirs, thank you very much for your service to the United States. I also thank all the men and women, past and present, who served. Thank you so much, Diane, for sharing that. And Memorial Day weekend, such an important time to echo the appreciation and gratitude we have for both men and women who served this nation. Jamal, and one of your fellow Marines, says, are they aware that the original structures are no longer being maintained? Some are being demolished. Are any of the original structures going to be saved? Sergeant Major, I'm going to push that over to you. You may know more about that advocacy work than certainly I do.
Original structures? I didn't understand the question. Original structures?
That's what he's asking. Sergeant James, if you could elaborate a little more for us to let us know when you say original structures. I'm going to take a leap of faith and assume, and if you would come in, Sergeant James, and help us out. I'm assuming that would be the structures of the buildings,
Hey,
perhaps, that they
let,
participated in.
let me break in. On Montford Point, which is now known as Camp Johnson, are two buildings. One is the Museum of the Montford Point Marine Association. Approximately less than a mile or so away is a memorial on the main street in Jacksonville, and it's called the Montford Point Marine Memorial. And I don't know the exact space it covers, but it has many number of things dedicated to the Montford Point Marines. So there's lots to see there. But even so, there are many people around sometimes that we don't even recognize. A young lady who spoke of Columbia, South Carolina, which is my home state, by the way.
Oh,
In the city of Columbia, is one of our legends. His name is Charles Bolden, who became
yes.
the first major generals in the United States, one of our first astronauts,
Yep.
did many missions around the Earth, and ended up as administrator of NASA, the largest scientific organization in the world, you might say. So there are people around and he's been very loyal to the Montford Point Marines. He's what
Beautiful.
to say that I am where I am because of the Montford Point Marines. So there are lots of them around, but whenever she sees a Marine, make sure that Marine knows something about Montford Point Marines. I add that to the Sergeant Major's words.
I
And,
love that.
and I would just come in on that question and say, as Ambassador stated, our structures are intact. When we talk about Montford Point Camp, which is now Camp Johnson,
Okay.
some of those buildings are still there and intact. Again, he mentioned our museum that we have there that's
Okay.
operational. And then, of course, the monument that's been dedicated to the Montford Pointers.
Okay.
The unique thing about that monument is the irony is in the 40s they wasn't welcome there in Jacksonville.
Yes.
To date, if you Google things to do in Jacksonville, that monument trends at number 1 or number 2 top things to do in Jacksonville. So the irony now is that visiting that monument is one of the most popular things to do in the city.
Yes. Yes.
And
Such a great point when
when I
go ahead,
came
sir.
when I came in for the dedication of that monument memorial to the Montford Point Marines, a city that used to hate us and give us all kinds of difficulty had a huge sign up there, but billboard saying, "Welcome home, our heroes, Montford Point
Wow.
Marines," and they had contributed something like $340,000 towards the building of that monument too. Well,
Yeah.
again, the city had changed a great deal.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, I certainly think it's interesting knowing individuals, my father serving during the Nam era towards the end, and how people regarded soldiers and Marines, if you will, and Navy that were serving their nation, right? It was a draft, friendly reminder when we talk about Nam in particular, that people would spit on them. And you know, the term is baby killing. Everyone knows the history. I wasn't alive then, but took a great interest in it. And then you fast forward to more modern conflicts or wars, and people will say, rightfully so, thank you for your service. So when we look back on things, we have to remember that, and to Diane's point, certainly out of Illinois, thank all the men and women, because there were many soldiers, many Marines, if you will, many sailors who didn't have that reception at that time,
yeah.
right? And that's unfortunate. That is disappointing to me that they served their country, they put things on the line, they did what was needed to be, and there was no appreciation from it, where some may have thought they had to hide it almost or not talk about it to cope. But we're doing right by them now, and I hate that it's at this point they couldn't experience it. But I thank you, Sergeant Major and Ambassador, and all your colleagues and advocate friends who are in the pits working for it. Thank you, Sergeant James, for that great question, and thank you, gentlemen, for providing some clarity. Kim says, please explain the process that this organization follows to confirm the service of these service members. You know, Sergeant Major Higdon, that's a great question, because you and I both know anybody can happen to say their uncle or great granddad did serve, and you do want some vetting done, and I'm sure you all have measures in place. Help us out.
So, the first thing we'll do is we want to verify their service. We're looking for some type of discharge certificate that shows that they served at Montford Point Camp. The easy thing to do is reach out to the organization, info at montfordpointmarines.org. A simple email to us will get you started. Someone will contact you and help you and walk you through that process so that we can help you verify your loved one's records. If you don't have any of the records, then we'll walk you through the process of how to get those records. But there is a vetting process, because you're right, anybody can say that their loved one served there, but we actually go through the process of verifying those records of your loved ones to see that it has a specific terminology on those records. And if it does, then our national president certifies that person as a Montford Pointer,
Okay.
and then we coordinate with the family to present them with the Congressional Gold Medal.
Thank you so much. Trey on YouTube says, thank you for your service, gentlemen. Shirley Thomas says, on behalf of her husband, Lisco Thomas, that's my parents there, as a son of a Montford Point Marine, I remember the stories. Thank you, Dad, for sharing that. Appreciate my father, who also served, a proud member of the U.S. Navy. Thank you, Dad, who was a corpsman, man. I want to point that out, gentlemen, you Marines. You have appreciation for that.
Yeah.
Diane, my aunt, says, are congressional medals currently being awarded?
Yes, they are, and we have the privilege at our upcoming convention of presenting 16 medals to newly discovered Montford Pointers. So their families will be at our convention, and we'll be presenting some new medals, including what the ambassador said to the commanding officer, the Colonel Woods. So his family will be there as well, and we'll be presenting the medal to 16 newly discovered Montford Pointers. So it's going to be a great event.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Corbett Kermis, whose grandfather also served, we share the same grandfather, said, thank you, gentlemen, for your service. Thank you, Kermis. Trey has a question. He said, did they experience unbearable treatment? Ambassador, I'm going to let you answer that from your own personal perspective, and then I'll ask Sergeant Major to follow up on that.
Not unbearable treatment. We had tough treatment, but not unfair treatment. By the time I came through, which was in January 1944, we had, all of our instructors by that time were Black. And so the other 90 white instructors had to go off and be more involved in the fighting out in the Pacific. There were not very many Marines at the beginning of World War II, less than 50,000. It had to go up to almost 500,000. And so these men were needed out there, but it meant that we got fast promotions and fast assignments, and we were great learners. We quickly broke most of the firing records of the Marine Corps. I often think myself that the reason the Marine Corps kept us separate from the white Marines in Florida, in South Carolina, was because they didn't want to be shown up. We were so darn good. And every Marine that came in, Black Marine, had to be better than others. And so we went out to show exactly what we could do. It's at that point in my same year that I came in when the new commandant, who was a Medal of Honor winner, as well as one who had fought throughout the Pacific, said these men are no longer on trial, they're Marines, period. And by the way, once a Marine, always a Marine.
That's right. That's right. That's why, I was very specific to make sure you gentlemen were references that, because I had been told that.
Shana, the way you pronounce Nam makes you sound like a veteran out yourself.
I have a father that's a veteran.
Well, you have an empathy, because this was the first war in which people of all kinds of backgrounds fought side by side and who depended on each other. And there was very little of any kind of that kind of thing out in the firing lines, because many men had to go out and suffer on being left out in the jungles by themselves. Yeah. And quite often they had to share everything they had, including food, water, you name it. Yeah. So Vietnam was a special experience, and my heart goes out to all of those men who served in Vietnam, because they were the ones who benefited or suffered from the good work that we did in 1944 in World War II. Yeah.
What a beautiful way to state that, benefited or suffered from it. And certainly thank you for your courage and your legacy. As promised, Sergeant Major Higdon, I have to turn the sights on you. And obviously, we're so blessed and fortunate to have a living member of Montford Point Marines on with us. Ambassador Theodore Britton Jr. is 99 years young and sharper than ever, and an all-time favorite of mine on this programming. I've interviewed so many people, but he is a standout. But Sergeant Major, the question from Trey out of YouTube was, were there unbearable treatment? And he said, not unbearable. From your interaction and engagement with, the thousands you all have identified so far. And I'm sure you've had opportunity to speak with some, but that's in a limited capacity of living Montford Point Marines. We know that. What have you gathered, you and your colleagues in your association groups throughout the country? What have you gathered?
So you have to remember that there was a headwind that they went into when they had the opportunity to serve. The commandant at the time, General Holcomb, had a famous statement, and he said, "If I had a choice of a Marine Corps of 5,000 whites or 250,000 Negroes, I'd rather the whites." So the headwind that the Montford Pointers went into was the commandant, the senior person in the Marine Corps at the time, would rather not have them there. He would rather choose 5,000 whites. So, and then when they got to the camp, they had to build their own facilities. So you remember the training facilities at Parris Island and San Diego, they were already established. Montford Point Camp was undeveloped land. It was just trees and swamp area.
Wow.
So the first wave that went in there, and only had to go through the rigors of Marine Corps recruit training, but they had to build their facilities at the same time.
The entire Camp Lejeune had to be built. Yeah,
exactly. So there was some definitely some resistance headwind that they walked into, which again paved the way once the camp got established. And initially, as Ambassador stated, the officers, the training work, they were white, but then they eventually phased in black drill instructors to train the follow-up Montford Pointers that came in there. So there was definitely some resistance, some headwind that they walked into. But the beautiful thing about it is they not only succeeded, but they exceeded all expectations. And that's what helped led to the intersegregation and prove that blacks were just as worthy of the title Marine as their white counterparts. So
yeah, that's a beautiful point to point out, a factual one as well. And I'll say this as someone who did not serve, but has the utmost respect for those who served, my father, my grandfather, you gentlemen. But when we speak of the Marines, and I'm speaking to two living Marines, so this is not a shock, but you all, according to pop culture and what people know, have some of the toughest training and rigorous training. And so I think of my grandfather going through that on top of the treatment. And for me, many, many years later, being an exer, being his granddaughter, who spent a lot of time in his household. And again, he passed when I was simply a young girl of 5 years old. But I think that had to be tough on top of tough on top of tough. Am I right in saying that, Ambassador, that you all are the toughest of the tough?
Well, keep in mind, for example, I didn't mention it, but one of my fellow Marines who served with me became the mayor of the city of New York. His name is David Dinkins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, David Dinkins was a Montford Point Marine.
Yes.
Very proud of it too. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. More history. I told you, watching Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton Radio Podcast tonight, because we're talking about the Montford Point Marines. It would inspire you, it would empower you, and it would motivate you. And I hope you feel that way, ladies and gentlemen, because it's certainly done that for me as well. My own children are watching. It's an important part of history, which is an important part of the life we are living. Rosalind out of Atlanta says, thanks for sharing and for your service, gentlemen. I have definitely learned something from both of you. Keep sharing the story. Thank you, Rosalind, so much for that great words of affirmation. Diane says, awesome. Linda, thank you so much. Linda says, Shana, thank you for helping get the word out to the world about Montford Point Marines. They paved the way for me to earn the title of Marine. Thank you, Linda. Thank you. And obviously a female Marine, everybody has my respect, but thank you as well for serving this nation and doing what you do, Linda, and you gentlemen as well. What a conversation. So key. I've got to ask this as we begin to wrap up. And for you and Ambassador, I'm going to let you have the last words, but Sergeant Major, I've got to ask you this. You are part of an organization. You all do a lot of hard work. You get in the trenches trying to keep the legacy alive of Identify, which blows me away that you all are just doing this voluntarily to make sure these individuals are not forgotten. What do you need for individuals? You said share the story and you're right, but is there anything else you want to give marching orders for someone that wants help in any other capacity to help you all with the overall mission. And by the way, this is a perfect time to talk about the overall mission and how we all can help.
So thank you for that and giving me this platform. But so I want to make sure everyone knows that we have a special event coming up here in Atlanta. So each year our association hosts an annual convention where we with all the organizations from across the country, all the chapters from across the country assemble on the designated city, and we celebrate the legacy of the Montford Point Marines. Well, this year Atlanta is hosting that convention. July 23rd at the Hilton in downtown Atlanta starts the show. And we're going to be celebrating this legacy right here in Atlanta. So if you're in Atlanta, prepare. The Marines are going to be landing here in the Montford Marines are going to be landing here in town. It's going to be a show like no other. 4 days, starting Wednesday, ending that Saturday. And on Saturday, it's going to be a real special event. We're doing what's called a celebration of first. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in other pioneers like Tuskegee Airmen. Oh, wow. We're going to bring in the Buffalo Soldiers, the Triple Nickel, and of course, the 6th AAA Battalion. We're going to bring all of these organizations or their representatives together and celebrate them as being pioneers or key first pioneers, which paved the way in African American history. Now, this event is open to the public. You can register for this at montfordpointers.com/convention. Montfordpointers with an S.com/convention. Go there and you'll see a lot more information about the convention coming up and how you can register either for the entire convention or for individual events. And other ways, of course, is the organization is open to all veterans. Join our ranks. Join our ranks and help us spread the word. So this is really what it is. Again, we have to saturate the community, and this is what we do. The chapters do on a regular basis. They're out in the community, the schools, university, you name it. We're out there in the community, churches, telling this story, hoping to help.
I think Sergeant Major may have a technical difficulty. Can you hear him, Ambassador?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay.
I'm taking it in.
So again, we want to join our ranks. Get a hold of the organization. Again, MontfordPointMarines.org will allow you to find the national organization, and of course, you can join the organization if you're a veteran, and you can be a part of this. Be a part of helping us spread the word. And of course, families can join too. So Shana, that's a nod to you. Families can actually join our association as well in our auxiliary ranks. So there's plenty of ways that people can get involved. If you're out there listening, we need your help to tell this story so the legacy of these heroes can live forever.
I love that. And what we'll make sure, we're going to put the link on your website in the chat. We'll do that minutes after we conclude the show. But do you have that website available for us now, Sergeant Major? Yes,
again, so for registration for the convention is Montford Pointers with an S, montfordpointers.com/convention.
Awesome. And we're going to put that in the link. If you come back, if you're watching us live, it will be there. If you're watching us on replay, perfect opportunity to share this information, get the story told, share the website. And he's saying it's open with there are different parts of your association that really allows community members to be a part of too. Yes. And you don't have to necessarily have been a Marine, right? You could have, you said any branch of service. So the competition's not there when it's with the Marines. You're all on this association. You're opening arms to everybody, right, Sergeant Major?
Exactly right.
I'll be sure to tell my father that, who's in the Navy.
Yeah. Love to have him part of the team.
One thing is, it's Memorial Day. 6 of our men on Montford Pointers, not the originals, but our successors, have been awarded posthumously the Medal of Honor. 1 in South Carolina, 1 in Florida, and 1 in Georgia. 1/2 of all of the Medal of Honor winners awarded to Black Marines have come out of those southern 3 states.
Wow. And as a native of South Carolina, and you are too, sir, I'm proud to know that and hear that. I want the last word from you, gentlemen, to be from you, Ambassador. And it's a question, not a gotcha question, but you've lived 99 years on this earth of ours. You've seen a lot of things. Some as you served in the Marines, and some obviously being a civilian. I have to ask you this: if you could go back many years ago to the day before you enlisted or enrolled in the U.S. Marines, what would you tell yourself then that you didn't tell yourself now?
I would say probably I'm a historian by interest, and I would probably have said I need to know much, much more about the service. I did not know very much about the Marine Corps. I've learned a great deal since, but to know some of the history would have pushed me forward because having known what the history is, I knew which way I could go, which was always up.
Yeah.
So, and I can say this, I still call myself a beneficiary of the years that I spent in the Marine Corps.
Thank you. Thank you. What a great story of hope for both of you, gentlemen. But thank you, Ambassador, 99 years young. And just, I think, a great reminder for anybody young, middle-aged, or seasoned to know, do your research, know that whatever you're doing, right? I'm a summarizer, if you don't mind, to put 100% forward, not realizing maybe it's history or not, but giving your all. Because you could be making the difference in the life of your own children to see, or your own brother or sister. And such a great example of that with you, Ambassador, and the life you've lived. And to be here 99 years young. And let us know in October, because we have to send you birthday wishes to be 100 years young. I love it. What a great story. Sergeant Major, certainly Johnny Higdon, thank you so much for allowing this episode to take place and all of your help and the coincidental meeting of you and I. Thank you, thank you, thank you. On behalf of my grandfather in heaven, I appreciate you and I thank you for your advocacy, you and all of the chapters around this country doing what you all doing so much. Ambassador, you speak for yourself. Your legacy speaks for itself. And thank you, Vicki. She said, awesome. Thank you for all of the service the two of you have given this nation. I started off this episode saying this was a personal mission of mine, and it is. I've covered so many shows, so many topics. I've interviewed so many people, and I've learned so much. But this one is near and dear to my heart, as it was my father's father, who was a Montford Point Marine, and anything I can do to get the word out, the history of my grandfather, who can no longer tell his story, I am dedicated and determined to do that. You gentlemen served in the U.S. Marines, obviously, Sir Ambassador, you were, and you still are, if you will, a Marine. So you all have the legacy and embodied all of that. I'm not in the military, but I certainly respect the military, and my blood of a Montford Point Marine runs through my veins. And because of that, I'll do everything I can to keep that story going. Save it, Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton radio podcast. We continue to highlight the topics you want to know more about. History is something that's important, and we have to continue to put it in the forefront so we don't repeat any of the bad ills of the past. You've got to know it to move forward. I know a lot of people say there's a lot of complexity with racism and things that happened in the civil rights era and the things before that. But we've got to know the truth. No matter where you are in life, my personal and professional opinion, we've got to be honest with our children about what happened, because it allows them to push them forward from what perhaps their grandfather, like my grandfather, went through. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for everything. If this is your first time tuning in or your 50th time, you know we cover the topics you want to know more about. We'll be back on very soon with more of those topics. Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton offers real talk for real people, and that's you. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your service to this country, and to all of the Montford Point Marines that are living and those who have transitioned on. This episode is dedicated to you. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and stay tuned. And have a peaceful and safe Memorial Day Monday. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And thank you. And Angela Williamson says, thank you for your service. She's out of Atlanta. This was very, very informative. Thank you, Shana. Thank you, gentlemen.